The real power of Glide doesn't lie in knowing all of the individual features of it. It lies in being creative in how you combine these together to design functionality that didn't exist before and that solves a real problem with new software. In the data editor, we chain columns together to create new types of computation. In the layout editor, we place and group components to create new types of interfaces. And in the action editor, we can create totally new sequences or conditional branching actions that can run many different steps with just a single tap. Now, you can still build very useful apps without ever opening the action editor. Single actions on components can be incredibly powerful, letting users set column values, call APIs, prompt Glide AI, and even trigger integrations. But knowing how to create custom actions really levels up the complexity of problems that you can solve. In this video, we're going to review some of the core principles of custom actions, cover a high-level perspective of what you can do with them to get you thinking, and then look at some examples of custom actions that we built into Glide University to power your learning experience. You can create new custom actions in the action editor or from the layout editor. When you create an action from the layout editor, the data source for that action will be based on the data source for that screen. For example, on this screen here, our data source is the items table. So when we create a custom action on this button, its data source will default to the items table, and we won't be able to change it. But when you create a new action in the action editor, you have to first choose what data source that action will be operating on. In other words, custom actions have to be associated with an underlying table, just like screens. This also means that you can reuse actions, but only on screens that have the same data source as that action. When you select the top level action in the action editor, you can see and select the data source, and you can see where that action has been used and then navigate to those locations. You can also see the run history for actions, allowing you to get a sense of how often this action is being triggered and diagnose any potential issues. Single actions or custom actions can be triggered when users interact with components, collections, or when they submit forms. And you can use any number of actions within a custom action. So how do people generally bring them together? In other words, what are the primary reasons and ways people use custom actions? When you add a single action on a component in the layout editor, that action doesn't get saved to the action editor. So if you delete that component, the action is therefore lost. But when you create a new action here, it gets saved to the action editor and then can be reused as many times as you want. As you can see here, we now have a custom action that just contains a single action. But for now, it's centralized here in the action editor so we can reuse or update it in the future. Another simple use for actions is just adding a single extra step to simple actions in order to log that the action has been triggered. For example, here on this action, we're triggering a Mixpanel event so that we can log in our Mixpanel analytics that a user has triggered this action. You might also do this with a secondary table, like a log table, so that whenever a user does a specific action, a new row gets logged to that table simply so that you know about and then can report on that data. Often when a user presses a button, you don't just want one or two things to happen, you want many things to happen. For example, log a row, set column values, trigger a webhook, play a sound, show a notification, move the user back a screen, and then notify your team in Slack, and then even log in analytics. To the user, a complex action like this might just feel like one fluid interaction, like a confirmation on a button. But for you and for the functionality of the app, it's doing a lot more work behind the scenes. The other dimension within custom actions is that of branches based on conditions. Just like you can set conditions on components visibility, you can also set conditions on the different branches of actions, which will then determine which sequence is run. For example, if a user with type A pushes the button, it does one thing, and if a user with type B pushes the button, it does another thing. Some of our experts actually end up only creating custom actions because it's a very organized and safe way of working. If an app has been built only with custom actions and you've named them well, anyone can get a really good overview of how the app works just by reviewing its actions and then visiting where these are used in the layout editor. So let's look at some examples, and for this we're going to go a bit meta and look at Glide's LMS, which was built entirely on Glide. Now, there's a good chance that you're actually experiencing this right now. As you're navigating and learning and completing lessons, these actions you see here are being triggered. Now, you can see that the LMS is a fairly complex app, and we have a bunch of custom actions that support things like bookmarking, certification, custom navigation that we've built, and then lesson completion and more. So let's look at some of these. So starting with the simple ones, we have some here that just have one action, but are simply saved to the action editor for us to be able to reuse them. And others also just add that tracking component that we spoke about earlier. Now, a feature of the LMS we get asked about a lot is the previous and next buttons on the certification quiz. The question that we show in this custom collection is powered by a query column that just shows one question at a time, and the question that it shows is filtered by a number in the editor we call index. The next action then increments the index number so that updates the query and what therefore is shown in the quiz. We then wrap this in a condition that checks to see whether the index is less than the total number of questions. If it is, it increments the number, and if it's not, it just makes a sound to signify the quiz is over. The submit pass action is used when someone has the minimum number of correct answers on a test and then submits their test for approval. This action then navigates them back and shows the right screen, sets the time that they submitted, adds a row to the passes table, and then sends the details of this certification to our other tools at Glide so that the rest of the Glide team can see who's passed certification. As we just saw, when a user has passed certification in the LMS, a new row is added to the passes table with a reference number. We then use that reference number in a condition that allows them to run this action. The action then takes the certification data and passes it to Docs Automator. Docs Automator then generates a PDF and outputs the URL of that PDF to this column, and then we show that user it in the app and allow them to download their certification. We also send a message to Slack to let the education team know that a new certification has been completed and by which user. So that was a deep dive into custom actions. We covered some of the core concepts of custom actions, had a look at why different people use custom actions, and some of our experts exclusively use custom actions, and an overview of some of the actions that power Glide University. So if you want to learn more about the individual actions that you can put inside of your custom actions, you can check out our docs. And to see how members of the community and our Glide experts are using custom actions in really exciting ways, you can join the discussion at glideapps.com/community.